Hi everyone, welcome to lesson 4 of the Cyber Core Skills course. Before I started, this is a introduction to the Linux operating system. It's basically a transition from lesson 3, which was Windows domain, all the way through to we're going to cover deep dark Linux. But this is sort of like an interim step where I'm going to show you the Linux operating system. I'm going to show you how it works, folder structures. But before we do that, I'm going to do a comparison and as almost a step into Linux. So I'm going to talk about the operating systems that are available and the variants and some of the differences and what they're used for. I'm going to talk about a comparison between Windows CLI, so our command prompt and PowerShell, and I'm also going to talk about the Linux CLI and use some comparisons, just so if it's your first time approaching it, you're not afraid of it and you can use it effectively. And just so you might have experience with Windows CLI, it's an easy step into the Linux CLI. And I'll also tell you about some of the resources where you can download them from, and then we'll get into it. Thanks very much. So we can see on my screen, on the left hand side I've got a Windows 11 standalone machine, and on the right hand side of the screen share I've got an Ubuntu box. Both downloaded. I've got the Windows 11 machine from the download repositories from Windows on their limited 90-day use, just for pure training non-commercial purposes. And on the right hand side I've got Linux, which is free through the GRU, the general use licensing, and it comes with certain agreements from that. So there's loads of Linux varieties. I just wanted to do a, before we step into the world of command line interfaces, I wanted to show you there's other variants available. So when we talk about operating systems in general, we talk about sort of maybe Windows and Mac OS, and we can build Windows all day long, as we have done in lesson 3, and we saw what we can utilize with it from web servers and file servers and Exchange and Windows domain, and we can pretty much use and DNS and DHCP and have all those good things. We can pretty much do all those same things on Linux really as well, and it provides a free option. It's something, it's a lot of the times they're lightweight and provide other options. Obviously they're different, whereas with a Windows domain, Microsoft provides you support and licensing and all that patch management stuff, whereas Linux, generally being an operating system, an open source operating system, maybe their patches and updates don't come as regularly and fast, so if there is a vulnerability spotted, it might take a little bit longer for the developers, who are driven sort of by passion and by this free use and licensing and the whole contribution. So you end up with things called hackathons, which aren't maybe what you think, as in it's not red teaming, it's where people come together and collaborate for open source development, whether it's an operating system or a program. Cool. So before we step into the world of CLIs and looking at these two, I'm just going to quickly bring up a couple of websites. First of all is the Cyber Core Skills course. So this is the repository that I've created for lesson 4, and at the top here you can see I've got all these links of different Linux OS variants that you can download the ISOs for. So I've already updated them with the links above that I'm going to show you just how many different variants are available. Just going to quickly save that because I've updated it. Cool. I've saved that, so I'll close that. And let's start at the beginning. So I mentioned Ubuntu, so that's probably one of the main flavors of Linux that people, when they're first starting out, generally learn. Really friendly, really good operating system, comes with all the tools that you can download, and you can download custom tools off of GitHub repositories and other places, but it's really good operating system. Free GRU sort of licensing, as I keep saying. So there's one option. You can download the ISO, lightweight, not much requirements, 25 gig hard drive required for the operating system. Obviously you would need more when you talk about updates and installing patches or additional tooling. Next I'm going to talk about, when it loads, is RedHat. So as we said, with Microsoft provides you enterprise level support, RedHat does the same. So you can see where it says buy it. So RedHat is a open source yet supported Linux operating system. So if you're using it in a production environment and you want to know where your patches have come from, and there's full what's like supply chain security, and understanding what your there are support there depending on what package you supply and what solution and what service level you agree to. There is a sort of operating system for you to use Linux. And especially if a lot of tools, say like SCADA systems and sort of engineering systems and mechanical systems might use a Linux requirement because it has a lot of different protocols it can talk on, you might use a RedHat. So if you're using big industrial systems or require an enterprise level solution, you can use RedHat because the support's going to be there. I've kept these links up so they're sort of all reloading as I go in. You've got a free version of RedHat, which is based on Debian, which is Centos. At the minute, this is end of life. As you can see, there is June 30th, 2024. That's sort of going now to its end stage where it won't be patched and supported anymore. But there's loads of programs that do run in it. There's a few differences between Debian orientated operating systems and say like Ubuntu. It's a lot of the commands do work, but there's a few different ones, and I'll discuss that when we're going through some of the commands. It's mainly about yum update, for example, but the way you install updates or yum install software, that's how you do it on CentOS. And being Debian based, this is the original Debian operating system, and what they're all sort of based on. It's provided by RedHat, but it's their free operating system, so it might not provide all the full functionality or support, but this is what we've got available. You can download ISOs, you can buy-load pre-loaded computers with it, but also it's available to run as a server. You can run it in the cloud, or you can run it as an ISO. So I could click here quite simply and download one of the 64-bit ISOs onto and build it as a VM, or even install it as a native operating system, which a lot of systems do. And when we speak about, for example, the latest Google laptops and Google systems, they're a variant of Linux. So don't go out buying, I'm not saying don't, because Google will support and patch systems, and Linux is ultimately, as they say, Linux is not vulnerable. Every system's vulnerable, but it's just that less vulnerabilities, less, I suppose, exploits have been made for Linux, because most systems that people want to gain access to for proprietary information is held on Windows systems. But anyway, so you do need to have security. And when we talk about Rocky Linux, for example, this is a lightweight, more or RedHat orientated, as we can see, but used for development. So if you're developing things like Python or having more sort of in dev area, play with Java and sort of full stack development and web stuff, these are the sort of operating systems you're after. So the next two, so you've got Rocky Linux for dev area, and you've got Mint, which is a very lightweight operating system, mainly used for sort of like production or productivity tools. So you can use it for either in dev environment or even going on to the levels of your media servers, for example. Bit more specific now, moving away from that, and another option of a Linux operating system is Raspbian or Raspberry Pi OS, which is specifically for Raspberry Pi. So it's going to be, because it's got less less processing requirements, it's going to be fit for the Raspberry Pi, and it's going to be as we can see there, the graphical user interface it comes with is close to Windows. So it's quite sort of familiar for sort of people starting out in the world of Linux, and often that's where people go. If you're going to start into world of Linux, is you buy Raspberry Pi, and you can sort of start playing with some of the command line. Then you can get into program development if you wanted to with Python, or you can start playing with the GPIO pins and start playing with real electronics and signals and changing LEDs and writing your own programs based on that. That's why the Raspberry Pi is a really good system to have, and you can add different modules on. You can have sensors, cameras, all the good stuff. So you can write programs for that. You can loads of things you can use it for. Your home security system, for example, you can run off the entirety of Raspberry Pi, and you can run it off Raspbian. Cool. Next one is, we're starting in the security realms. I wanted to talk about Backtrack, even though you won't use it. So when I first started out in security or IT, or even stepping into this world, I thought, whoa, you sort of see the dragon. But the Backtrack was the original sort of cybersecurity operating system. It later evolved, as we said, 2006, starting to show my age there. It was probably about 2008 when I first downloaded this. Then the initial pen testing, so we start talking about a little bit of red teaming, and then we've got the next evolution, which is Kali Linux, which is the sort of the standard tool everybody goes for. don't be narrowed down just to Kali. It is a very, very strong tooling, and a lot of things are made for Kali natively. So there are some specific tools, whether it's ethical, red teaming, and penetration testing, or sort of digital forensics environment you're working in. There's some tools that are just built for around Kali that are best optimized for Kali. But a lot of the tools that are available for Kali are also available on other operating systems, and I'll be sort of narrow-minded if I didn't tell you about them. So another version or another alternative to Kali is Parrot OS. Some people prefer it. It's built on different Linux bases, so basically their core coding of OS, for example, and we can build up and use the similar tool sets as we do for Kali, but on Parrot. Some people prefer Parrot, the way it reacts. Some people say it's quicker. Some people prefer Kali because they're more familiar with it. And I'd say use either, really, and actually use both. And why? I'll hold my opinions back on that. There's some tools that are available for Windows as well. And if you're really going for a red team exploiting a sort of network, and it's obviously ethical, a lot of times the results, you won't get the same thing with one box, and if you try a different box, the tool might be a bit different and it might run a bit different, you might get a different result. So always sort of play with both sides of the field, really. Talking about sort of digital forensics and sort of digital side and security, SANS have got their own called Slingshot, really good operating system. I've used it during SANS courses and after as well for quite some time, because the tooling's set. There's some bespoke SANS tooling on it, but it's really good, and you can download it and it's free to run. Big thing that they're doing, which I love, is seeing when people download files, is including the hash. So whenever you download an ISO, always make sure you check the ISO's hash that matches the website. So it's A, not been modified in transit, or it's not been modified on the site. You can run it, you go, at least it's not been changed. So A, potentially could have additional malicious software installed, but it's about your providers. Who do you trust? And SANS being one of the, I think I use the term original OG of sort of learning platforms, and one of the most respected. So SANS having such a good reputation and such good training material and very good instructors, they're a reputable sort of source to download your Linux distribution from. Brilliant. And next one, we've got Tails. So Tails is used for a very clean signature. So it basically, if you don't really want to create much of a signature on any type of computer, or whether it's collapse it into a box and you can run it purely off a USB, you can run it off an entire hard drive, you can build it, and once you build it then close it, it basically destroys itself. So if you're wanting to, it's very good for privacy, it's very good for security, but also very good in a sort of forensics world, really. But that is also available. So Tails is a good option when we talk about the sort of other end of security, really. It's more about privacy or sort of having minimal impact on that network. Cool. I've got another one, and it's a shame I have to tell you about this. No, it's not. It's a shame that if I didn't tell you about it. The Hannah Montana Linux distribution, a bit of a funny one. It's basically Linux and Ubuntu distribution, but with things like the wallpaper, some of the core file structure properties, and a lot of the characteristics have been changed with Hannah Montana on the wallpaper. Brilliant. And included in this is some loads of additional variants. There's one for if you have a problem or want to use Linux or an Ubuntu system for a specific purpose, there's going to be an operating system for you. And I've included these links within the repository of the course notes. Brilliant. So let's get onto it. Let's get onto the desktop of our machines, and let's start doing some comparisons of command lining. If I can get password, finding it loads up. There we go. So I'm on the desktop of my Windows 11 machine, and I've used Windows 11 because I wanted to keep it as current as possible. A lot of videos use Windows 10, but we might as well be up to date and as current as we can. And I've got an up to date an Ubuntu box, which obviously they're connected to the internet at the time, and also they're connected on the same virtual switch and the same network, so we'll be able to talk between them, and it proves what we can see as well. So we're going to come back and we'll do some command line for both. So let's set up our desktops how we want to. So on my Windows 11 machine, I'm going to get command prompt and PowerShell up, and on my Ubuntu Linux box, Ubuntu distribution, I'm going to bring up the CLI, the terminal, effectively. So a couple of ways you can do that. On the Ubuntu box, you can right click and say open terminal. So that'll open terminal basically on my desktop. That's why we'll see the word desktop. Happy days. On here, I've already made the text big on the Windows 11, just so it's clearer for you. On the Ubuntu box, I'm going to have to make it bigger on the command prompt. So command and calculator loads up. It's just a little bit laggy because of it's the nature of what we use it for. We use Windows for the GUI and the desktop and everything we want it to, but Linux and generally we'll use a lot more CLI, and that's why we sort of talk about the CLI when we do use a lot more about Linux, because that's heavily, all the tools are, they might have a great GUI, but they're really going to be configured and give you a lot more power when we start using the CLI, and we sort of hold back from the GUI, so we hold back from the CLI a lot on Windows, unless you start talking about data centers. So when we talk about our core domain controllers and exchange servers, whereas I've built them nicely within the GUI, and you can't really go wrong with the GUI. You can sort of like next, agree, configure, delete it, and then redo it, and you'll always get to the end result eventually. There's something called core. So a part of the core operating system, you have to use PowerShell commands to interact with the operating system and create users and groups and all that good stuff. Install different modules like DHCP or DNS, or even edit entries. But that's why we still have a lot of tooling. So you might ask, why do we still have command prompt on Windows 11? So one of the reasons we have command prompt on Windows 11 is, let me just load this PowerShell up, is a lot of the scripts that people use within an administrative environment or financial or real sort of production environments might utilize command prompt very rather than PowerShell. And a lot of the scripts might start off in PowerShell and go back to command prompt, but often can't then raise their escalation privileges or within the script, or that might be production, or within a program. They might utilize command prompt rather than PowerShell, depending on their age, and then are also available to developers. If you think at the minute there's a world shortage of developers, and that's why later on we're going to talk about scripting and a little bit of programming, those key skills, and this is one of the very core skills that we have to know, is familiarity with Linux, because that command line development area requires these skills. So that's why it's really good to sort of see an overview of all of this. I'm just going to change the size of the font, so get onto preferences on each and increase the font size. So font, and let's make it 20. I think I've chosen, that's probably going to be well too big, but there we go. And they're going to be overlapping, but it's all good. Properties, font, and you can even see from the menus these are very similar systems. Did I choose 28? I think I did. Yes, there we go. So here we go, and here we go. So command prompt and PowerShell, very similar tools, but with PowerShell you end up with a lot more functionality. There's a lot of sort of get and install modules, and it runs like an entire operating system command line rather than sort of command prompt probably ever has, and probably whereas it's more DOS based, I'd say PowerShell's more Windows 10 onwards and sort of been around for a bit longer, or not a bit longer, it's more modern in that respect, and a lot more runs on PowerShell. So I just wanted to run in just a few commands between command prompt, PowerShell, just to ease people's minds between the differences, and also bring in Ubuntu for this purpose, just to show you how the commands are the same but differ really. So I run ifconfig on my Windows 11 machine on command prompt, and we can see our IP address. I run it on here as well, and it's coming up with the same IP address, thankfully. It's the same machine. If I run ifconfig on here, it won't work. So I sort of hold off telling you this, but if I run ifconfig, it's an older command. We don't sort of use it now. When I first started in Linux, we used ifconfig as the primary method to see our IP address. But as an introduction, it's not too bad to see. It's like ifconfig, just if interface config. So we can see our IP address is here, and we can tell the information. So it's a little bit harder to see within Windows, I'd say, but we're going to get there in a nicer way. So I'll show you the best way of seeing the IP address. So we can see our interface here, our ENS33. This is sort of like Ethernet 1 really. It's a digitally assigned, encapsulated interface, but it's for an output anyway. So iNet, which is your IP address, so we've got 160.152 and we've got 160.149. So you can probably guess which machine I turned on first, the Windows 11. Cool. Class C network, broadcast address, physical. That's our link local IPv6 address /64. So it's half of that 128 is being used. Happy days. That's half network, half subnet network address, half host. Cool. Then we've got our loopback here. So we'll always see a loopback as on there, or link local. Cool. We don't see it so much on here, but we've got very much the same information, whereas we've got default gateway set as well. Cool. And if I do ifconfig all, you can see a lot more information. And let's have a quick look at what options are available for ifconfig. So the way we can do that is a couple of different ways, and I'll show you. So if I need like a help, so I'll type help, and I can type help against any of these commands. So if I do help on so if I run help on ifconfig, if I do ifconfig /# so that tells me, it gives you a bit of a readme file. So the way I got to that was ifconfig, can't really see, so if I just, so it is, I'm just going to move me across, there we go. So if I do ifconfig, as we can see down here, // it gives us a bit of a readme file based on the ifconfig command. So we've got help available in command prompt that we can read up, and all the different variants. So if we want to renew our IP address, we can do ifconfig / renew, and there's release, so we do release renew normally within PowerShell. I'll just quickly show you. And ifconfig /, so it should be the same readme file because they're running from the same sort of location. That's good. And actually PowerShell comes with like a blue background. You can change it, or you can run it through an IDE which comes up with a few different colours. You get a lot of yellow within PowerShell. And if I do ifconfig and I do /, help, no, if I so for me to run the help in Linux or Ubuntu, it's -h, but also works in here. So for people often within PowerShell, I know I've mentioned this before in the last lesson, was / and you can use tac. So if I do hyphen ? It's the same thing. So hyphen ? If I run hyphen ? here, it shouldn't work. It does. I've even learned something here. Cool. So I can run pretty much the same command in Linux. Happy days. Hopefully this is putting you at ease a little bit. It might look different from a standard Windows desktop, but you can change the wallpaper, and that's the toolbar, and you've got this sort of applications here. So whereas in Server 2012 you press the start menu and it takes over the entire screen, it looks sort of very similar in state as in that. Cool. Some other commands. So if I want to ping between, I'll just show you the differences between that. I don't want to stay too long on comparing them both, but I just wanted to show you some of the commands. So if I type host name, I can check the host name. If I type host name, I can check the host name. So obviously that's predetermined host name. I'll not reset that one. Same commands on both. Nothing to be scared of. So obviously, like as Linux goes, it's a very flexible operating system, and it just takes you to install it, get on the command line, and run a slight variant of the commands that you already know about. So if I do ping, I'm just going to do ifconfig on here, just to turn the IP address, ping 192.168, hold on,
ifconfig. That one was 152. Remember 152, tell me in a minute. So ping 192.168.160.149. Couldn't see this failing because of the firewall, but I'll come back to that. Ping 192.168.160.152. Thanks for telling me. So that's pinging, that's not pinging. I'm just going to quickly, so actually, that's holding out and waiting. I'm just going to disable the file on here. Very bad practice, especially we considered or Windows Defender, advanced settings. So I'm just going to allow ICMP. I'm not going to fully disable the firewall. We're going to do things with a little bit more finesse. That we've completed lesson 3, so we can go inbound ICMP. Allow Internet Communication Control Protocol, ICMP. Hold on, what I'll do is I'll add a new rule. So if I go right click, add new rule, so I found it. If we looked at protocols column and then select this and then go, so that's being blocked at the minute. So if we go disable rule and I disable inbound as well, and there we go, ICMP, IGMP, but ICMP v4, and it's these two I need to enable to allow them. I'll do just outbound. Oh, there we go. We can see our ping's now dropped in, and I'm just going to run the ping again on here, so we can see our Linux box, our Linux instance, or whatever we want to call it, is continually pinging, and by default our Windows only does 4. Obviously we can add -t or -t, so ping -t or /t, depends on how you want to sort of use that bit, and that will continue. And the way we get out of it is Control-C and Control-C. Cool. Basically, everything's built on Linux. That's what I'm fundamentally getting at. Everything comes from a variant of it somewhere, and it was Unix was the first sort of variant around, and then there's loads of commercial ones that I've sort of played with. Sun Solaris a little bit. That's in more of a production environment. But there you go. We've looked at some commonalities. There's one little bit I want to show you quickly, just out of probably enthusiasm, awareness of sort of, because this does go on to real cyber skills course, and I want to sort of gain some knowledge from the offset, not just building stuff for the sake of building. We can see 64 here, and we can see 128 here. So this is one way you can identify what operating system people are using, is when we ping we get a reply back, and or you can determine by listening to traffic what its TTL is. So obviously Bing 64 identifies it's a Windows variant. I think it's 255 for like Cisco, and for when we talk about Linux it's 128. So you can literally determine, if you go through a router, obviously it reduces that TTL by 1 every time you go through a new network or a router. But there's things you can tell right there about fingerprinting operating systems. Cool. I'm going to move on to sort of more Linux orientated commands in the next video, but thanks very much for watching.